That is James Heale, political correspondent at The Spectator. James, it's funny, isn't it? You know, they act like a load of pathetic, sixth-form debating society leftists when they're in opposition. They were in the shadow cabinet, though. They weren't just, you know, odds and sods on the back benches. And now they're in government. They're like, it doesn't matter. We're making the calls. We're having great diplomatic relations. I kind of think with someone like Donald Trump, he'll be like, yeah, whatever. I don't think that man actually bears a grudge. The fact that J.D. Vance is his running mate says it all. But I'm pretty sure that the Trump machinery, or people who are now going to be occupying important positions in the White House, might kind of be looking at Britain with a slightly different view.
Yes, certainly. And I mean, back in July, I interviewed Woody Johnson, who was the first ambassador in Trump's first term from America to London. And he's tipped to make a return if Trump takes up the White House, obviously, in January, and now points him for that position. And he was telling me that, you know, people will remember those comments. Those comments, you know, are not harmless. People will remember them in the machinery. And of course, when we have the leaders appearing on the world stage, it's very likely, for instance, that members of the international press or members of the international community may well bring up those comments once again. And as you say, Alex, I think the video that's been doing the rounds this week is about a video from 2020 when Angela Rayner wasn't in Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet. She was in Keir Starmer's shadow cabinet.
Hey,
and the
should we have a look at that vid? We've got that vid. Let's play it. Here we go.
Donald Trump is killing, you know, thousands of Americans by giving them duff advice, and his macho, I'm all right, you know, look at me, I've survived COVID. He's an absolute buffoon. He has no place in the White House. He's an embarrassment, and he should be ashamed of himself.
Buffoon, ashamed of himself, embarrassment. I think that woman needs to look in a blimmin' mirror. Maybe Lord Ali can afford to buy her one. The problem we have here, of course, is this isn't the first time in recent months that senior figures who are now, you know, in America, who are going to be part of the Trump administration, have been looking at what's going on in Britain, whether it's talking about the clampdown on free speech. Elon Musk has gone to town on that one. You know, Joe Rogan, the biggest podcast that you could listen to in the world, has been really making a big noise about what he sees as authoritarian rule in the UK. Add to that these extremely sort of toxic, irresponsible, reckless and unprofessional comments. I don't care whether it's coming from someone on the opposition benches and what position they held or didn't hold. It's just not becoming of an elected member.
Well, I think you've also got to remember that you do aspire in politics to go into government. That's why you stand for election to Parliament. That's why you're campaigning as a member of the Labour Party. It is very short-sighted to make these kind of comments about a major world leader if you're going to have to end up working with them. Now, I think that, as you say, Donald Trump obviously is someone who's someone who can move on, who can be a bit transactional, and so there's hope there. But I think it's interesting what it means for other people around him in his team, particularly when it comes to some of those intelligence and sensitive matters, because obviously with the defence apparatus between the two countries, the US and the UK, is so well interconnected, and people will be asking certainly about all of this. And as we've seen from past crises, be it Suez, be it Falklands, etc., often personal relationships really matter when it comes to the crunch.
And politically, this actually gives a very strong arm to Nigel Farage, doesn't it? Because we know that he does indeed have Sir Keir Starmer's ear, doesn't have it, it might do, you never know, does have Donald Trump's ear. And my understanding as well is there might have been a little bit of encouragement by Nigel Farage to say to Donald Trump, hey, have a look at this Chagos Island stuff, and guess what? He's looking at it. So this is going to create a bit of a headache for the Labour Party, because they're probably going to have to go and cosy up to Nigel Farage a little bit if they want to have an interlocutor who could be quite effective in that position.
Back in May, there was reports actually that Nigel Farage had been very important in facilitating that conversation between David Lammy, then the Shadow Foreign Secretary, and J.D. Vance, and getting those meetings over the line. And I asked Nigel about this, and he sort of just grinned and didn't downplay it, shall we say. So I do think that it's going to be really interesting to see what happens there. Donald Trump is obviously a very mercurial operator. We all remember what happened with Kim Darroch, the former ambassador to the US, when Donald Trump, it turns out he'd made disparaging comments, leaked cables, and Donald Trump tweeted about it, and he was gone within 72 hours. So I think that that's a challenge to any prime minister, particularly one of, you know, the soft left, which Keir Starmer is. And so it's going to be interesting to see how a very conservative Republican and a very social democrat Labour prime minister do work together in office.
Yeah, I mean, one thing's actually, let's look at the idea of protectionism and tariffs against certain UK exports. I think Britain would be in a fairly decent position to say, well, look, we're not really going to be threatening America PLC in the same way that the Chinese dumping cheap steel is and electric vehicles coming from China. We give you the odd luxury car and a bottle of scotch. And I think that there's plenty there to negotiate over. But I do wonder actually now whether those negotiations are going to be channeled through the proper channels, let's say, because Trump doesn't always work in a proper way, does he? He sort of has his own MO, and I wonder now whether suddenly you're going to find diplomatic relations being conducted by the leader of a smaller party in Parliament.
I think that one of the challenges, and I was chatting to an Australian diplomat about this, is that normally with the White House you have not much access but a lot of influence. If you can get through to the president or the president's team, you can influence them hugely. The opposite was true of the Trump White House in its first term. There was a huge amount of access but not much influence because Trump would listen to 10 different voices in the room. And I think they've got to remember that Keir Starmer, although obviously, you know, the leader of America's closest ally, will just be one voice, and he will be listening to a variety of different voices telling him different things. And I mean, you know, you've got to think, who would you rather spend time with, Mar-a-Lago, Keir Starmer or Nigel Farage? And I suspect Trump might find the latter.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think in recent years there's some hope in, let's say last year, Lord Cameron, as Foreign Secretary, is very much credited with having gone out and spoken with Trump about getting the Speaker in America to lift that block on the bill passing through, which was due to give $60 billion worth of aid to Ukraine. It had been stuck there for 6 months. Ukraine desperately needed it, and I think it took Lord Cameron to go and speak to Donald Trump to then say to Mike Johnson, hey, how about we actually get this thing passed? But I wonder how affable he's going to be to someone like David Lammy trying to do the same. I don't think at the very least he takes him seriously.
Well, the other issue complicating it all is I was chatting to one member of Parliament who pointed out that, you know, there's been a huge amount of behind the scenes laying the groundwork by people like Dame Karen Pierce, who's the current ambassador. A lot of the staff in the British Embassy have really tried to correct what they did in 2016, really work hard this time. And then, of course, the Labour staff has issues blown up with 100 Labour has gone there in the middle of an election campaign. So that was suboptimal, to say the least. I think that, you know, Trump is obviously a instinctive Anglophile. They'll try and play up that for all it's worth and emphasise the key interests together. But they're going to have to use as much diplomatic feet work.
It's going to take a lot of diplomatic oil, let's say. James, thank you ever so much. It's brilliant getting your insights into that.